Everybody kind of knows the rules of brainstorming. You get 4 or 5 people together. You can't by the way, you can't brainstorm with 20 people. Everybody has to be able to see each other. It's kind of, I think of brainstorming like a jazz ensemble. Maybe you can have a trio, a quartet, a quintet, maybe. Past that, you can't play jazz. It's just too complicated, too many people. So they get together and they often, come up with a question and they brainstorm for a while and they go, great, that was fantastic. And then there's all these Post-its or all these notes on a whiteboard. And somebody says, I'll take a picture. They take a picture with their cell phone. And then, and that's my ideas, that's where ideas go to die. Ideas just go to die on cell phones. Somebody's got a picture and they all walk away. And then I ask them, well, what happened? They say, well, we had a brainstorm. And I said, well, what was the result? And they said, well, we had a lot of ideas and what are you going to do with it? And they haven't really made it actionable. So here's the thing. Brainstorming works great for coming up with lots of ideas and very diverse ideas, particularly if you have a really good jazz team that can really play off of each other. But at the end of a good brainstorm, when we run it at the d.school, there'll be 100, 150 Post-its on the board. But that's not the end, because you haven't really done anything. Generating the ideas is relatively simple once you get good at it. Figuring out what you're going to do with the ideas, putting them into sort of buckets. Often ideas are clustered around certain themes. So the first thing we do, and the reason we use Post-its, is then we stop and say, okay, the brainstorm's over. Now we're going to do a little bit of evaluation, a little bit of what we call naming and framing the ideas. We're going to put them into like this cluster's all around one thing, this cluster's all around another thing. These are all wildcards, they don't cluster at all. We kind of move the Post-its around. And then we try to give them, put the buckets or sub-buckets into some kind of a framework, and we just give it a name. And the funnier the name, the better. These are the crazy grandmother ideas. These are the ideas, if ducks could, fly, or if chickens could fly, this is what the ideas would be. So we give them funny names, but the idea is to sort of bring them back down into reality and put them into some kind of framework. Because at the end of my brainstorms, if you ask somebody what happened, they'd say we had 150 ideas. Turns out they were in about 6 different categories, and then we ranked the top ideas in each category, and we have 7 ideas we would really like to build a prototype of, because we think these 7 ideas ask the most interesting questions around the problem or the space that we're doing it. Same thing with life design. When you finish your 3 Odyssey plans, we say find 4 or 5 things on the Odyssey plans you want to brainstorm, because it's something you're curious about. I just discovered, hey, maybe I want to be a real estate developer, or maybe I want to figure out what it's like to make, gourmet, cupcakes at a cupcake store. So you've got these ideas, and now you brainstorm all the different ways that you could create a prototype around those ideas. And then you name those, bring them back out of crazy land into something that's actually real, and then you have something that you can work with. So at the end of my brainstorms, people will say, literally will say, I got 110 ideas in 5 categories down to 6 top ideas, and we're going to build 4 prototypes. That's an actionable brainstorm. And then you do the prototypes and you get some new data, and the world tells you something that you didn't know, and then you get to brainstorm again. But brainstorming just for its own sake is kind of a misunderstanding of the process. Now, a lot of times people also have trouble with the notion of wild ideas. Why do you have to have crazy ideas? Because no one's going to use the idea, well, what if there was no gravity? How would we solve this problem? And that's one of the prompts I throw. When people are stuck, I give them prompts like, what if you were an elephant? How would you do this? How would you use a mouse if you were an elephant? How would you do this if there was no gravity? And they have some crazy, crazy idea. The problem is our brains want to cluster ideas very tightly around some core central thing. And no matter how many times we brainstorm, if we don't change the parameter of that thing, we'll get ideas that are roughly clustered around the same thing. To make these big conceptual leaps, to start a new cluster, a new center of ideas, you really need to kind of break out of your box. And the only way to do that is to come up with something that's so stupid, it makes no sense at all. And then you have a bunch of ideas there, and then you have a bunch of ideas there, and a bunch of ideas there. You can always bring the wild idea back. An example we did a sort of an example brainstorm, and this isn't probably the way it worked, but for a while people were trying to figure out how do you solve poverty in India, and the idea was, well, we'll give money to rich people, they have companies, they'll employ people, there'll be a trickle-down effect, and poor people will eventually get saved. And people have been doing that for a long time and didn't work. Then a crazy guy named Muhammad Yunus said, what if we give money to people who have nothing? We'll give money to people so poor they probably can't pay it back, and that's microlending. Now, I mean, his idea wasn't to give it to people who can't pay it back, but the big shift was, instead of this trickle-down thing, what if we just give this woman $50 and she runs a cell phone service in her village, and that lifts her out of poverty and allows her to hire 5 other people to do cell phone service. It was a completely radical idea that came from upending the whole model, right? That you give money to the top of the pyramid and it trickles down, and his idea was, no, let's just flip that. We give money to the bottom of the pyramid and it'll trickle out. And that's been one of the most successful innovations, right, in poverty reduction and in finance. So it's things like that where you really need a brand new idea that requires the wild idea to get it started. And then you can always bring it back and find ways to make it implementable.